So thank you.
Thank you. Yuliana Shmitovets, Belarusian Cyber-partisans. I want to have a follow-up question on non-state actors. We know that there are hacktivist groups, Ukrainian hacktivist groups, Belarusian hacktivist groups that are not affiliated with the government. They are on the right side. They're doing an important job, and they're doing it for a good cause. Yet, potentially, they operate in a gray zone. And as much as I agree with the opinion that we need to get rid of ambiguity, what will happen with such hacktivist groups?
Interesting. Okay.
Is that during armed conflict you're talking about? When you say they're on the right side, are you talking about the Russia conflict?
Russian conflict,
okay.
and let's say in a Belarusian case,
After the elections.
After the elections, correct. After
so
the
even
elections,
outside
in a specific circumstances where people are oppressed and.
So, for example,
yes.
Cyber-partisans in Belarus leaking the documentation of police officers who
that
were
committed
beating and
crimes.
imprisoning people.
Yes, correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
So on the non-state actor, I mean, that actually is my field, and it's weird that you asked that question because during this morning's presentation on the Ukraine, which I found absolutely fascinating, I was writing furiously because I said someone needs to write an article on that, and I was making myself an outline of what that article might look like.
He's probably actually already written it. You're so
already.
I think the manual handles that pretty well, at least with regard to the conflict. However, we need to update it and enhance the emphasis. There is one, and it's called direct participation in hostilities. And so we need to clarify that, for example, someone may directly participate in hostilities even though they were outside the battle space, things like that. We need to clarify, for example, that if someone is engaging in cyber operations to prevent a violation of international humanitarian law, that is not direct participation in hostilities that would then render them targetable, which is important because the Russians have the capability to target those individuals in Ukraine. The real question is one of what about all those individuals that are outside of Ukraine? And the question isn't their status. The question is neutrality. Because if it's an international armed conflict, we know there are belligerents, one on each side in this case, and we know that other states are probably neutral. I've written recently questioning the neutral status a little bit, but if we call them neutral, the question is, does that neutral state have an obligation to put an end to those activities, because neutral states typically must put an end to the exercise of belligerent rights in neutral territory? I'm not so sure the answer is yes, because there is a doctrine called qualified neutrality, but it's very controversial, and very good scholars have written that it's not a good doctrine. I'm a qualified neutrality person, which means that I believe that states do not have to take action to put an end to the IT Army's operations from their territory. However, my colleague at the Naval War College, writing in West Point's Articles of War blog, spectacular blog, in response to me, because I wrote about it there, Pete Pedroso today had a very good blog saying that that's a breach of neutrality. States need to do something. So in that space, we need to be more granular. The law's good, but we need to be more granular. In the non-armed conflict space, I would just echo exactly what my friend Marco said. You know, international law is a body of law that is, like it or not, it's a body of law that is generally designed to handle the relations between states, and we have rules of state responsibility that address attribution, and you apply those rules, and we do a pretty good job there. The big issue is human rights. Marco comes on, now has the co-editor of the project, and if you don't know Marko Milanovic, he's probably one of the top guys in the world, if not the top guy in the world. Well, I'm just saying that to be nice, because there's an audience. But this is,
otherwise, that's not how he treats.
But in all seriousness, one of the reasons why I brought Marco on, why I asked Marco to do this, is because I felt that our chapter on human rights was weak. It was one of the chapters I was most dissatisfied with. And working with Marco and capacity building, I understood how weak it is. And so that's an area where non-state actors are going to have to be addressed.
But if I may just add, on that particular point, you are not, if you're a cyber partisan in Belarus and you're fighting against the Lukashenko regime outside armed conflict, international law doesn't apply to you. You're not violating international law in any way by leaking the confidential documents of the Lukashenko regime about how many thousands of people were in the Zhodina prison.
Right.
You know, that there's no violation of international law at all. The issue is if they put you in prison for what you've done, does that violate, for example, the freedom of expression you have under the ICCPR? And the answer is yes, normally. You know,
and I would
that's what the relevance of international law in that type of context.
Very quickly respond to your point, because I think you make a really good point. I'm hoping that in great part it is an exercise in clarifying the law, but you're absolutely right. And you've nailed one of the two areas where we will certainly add ambiguity, and the first is sovereignty, because we did not acknowledge this very strange British view, but we must, because it's our commitment. And second, the other area is due diligence. I will be frank that Australia hasn't come on board yet. In due diligence, I did not expect as much pushback, and it is on the notion of due diligence, and the Five Eyes states as well as Israel have now pushed back on due diligence, and I did not expect as much confusion over the nature of the due diligence principle. So due diligence, which is hugely important, is going to change quite a bit to add in the uncertainty about it and to make it more granular for states that are trying to figure it out what their national position.
Thank
so you're
you.
right.
Now,
good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Midshipman Veronica O'Connor of the United States Naval Academy. And my question is, how do you view the actions of independent, non-state-affiliated hacktivists, such as the Belarusian railway hackers, since they don't operate with any oversight from the Ukrainian government but still support your cause?
Thanks. Roman?
Actually, yes, when we were researching the actions of that huge amounts of people involved in the situation, there was not just a question of understanding of coordination or any kind of purpose or target setting, but also there was an ethical question on what are these actions can lead to. Basically, a lot of international volunteers were aiming not just only governmental resources or military resources, but other resources which were also affecting the other people in a country. And of course, what lessons we can learn from this situation is, first of all, there is a huge support on a volunteer basis, not just in our country, but also around the world. And the second is that for such kind of situation, in our country, for example, or probably in any other institutions, there was no completely preparedness for any kind of informational distribution or communication. While in this situation, it would be very, very on demand, I would say. Thank you.